Hello and welcome to the next Holy Cross Alumni webinar. I'm Maura Sweeney, Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar offered exclusively for Holy Cross graduates. Today, I'm excited to welcome Pat Chadwick, class of 75, and Julie Crockford. Pat and Julie will speak to us about purposeful aging and creating a new narrative for life after 50. We'll be together for an hour. After the formal presentation, Pat and Julie will take questions from you for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions through the questions feature on your webinar control panel. The presentation is recorded and will be made available to all participants within a few days, so keep an eye out on your email. You can also check the Holy Cross Career Webinar website. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Pat and Julie.
Thank you, Maura. Good afternoon, good morning. Hello to everybody who's joined us, and thank you. What I thought I would do initially is give you an overview about what we hope to learn today as we start this journey. We're hoping that we can help each of you to embrace this chapter of your life if you've not done so already. We're hoping that we can help you to gain knowledge about resources and opportunities that are abundant for you in this chapter of life. And we also hope to help you to acquire some new tools that you can use as you map your future. We know there are many different types of challenges as well as opportunities that may accompany this chapter of life. As an example, you may want to or need to earn a salary. You may have caretaking obligations that take up much of your time. We cannot address every part of your search for meaning, and we don't pretend to have all of the answers. What we do hope is that we can help you to open your eyes at least to some part of what this new chapter can bring to you. I'm going to turn over to Maura now, who's going to ask us a question to answer. Maura?
Absolutely. So the first question we want to ask everyone is, where was the bulk of your primary career? And if you're still working, certainly answer that. If you're currently retired, let us know where you were for the most of your career. Was it corporate, government, nonprofit, or another field? I'll give you a few more seconds to submit your answers. Once it looks like most people have voted, then I'll close things and we can see what everyone has to say. So about 5 more seconds. Looks like the votes are in. I'll share those results. About 54% were or currently are in the corporate world, about 10% in government, 17% in nonprofit, and 18% in other. And now I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jules. Thanks, Maura. What we'd like to do to begin our talk today is help you understand a little bit more about who we are. As Maura said, I was a graduate of the class of 1975. There were only 25 women in my class, and we only attended for 2 years. So some of you may remember those days when we went co-ed. As a student, I had every intention of going to law school, yet I deferred my acceptance and went to work in a management training program in retail. I was actually interviewed on campus by a Holy Cross alum and went into the retail business thinking it would be a 1-year commitment. But I enjoyed it. It was fun. I learned very quickly that I could drive a profitable business, and I could also build and develop leadership teams. What I really liked is that I could help people maximize their potential. Retail was fun for me. So I spent 40 years juggling the typical life priorities, family, career, children, etc. And at the 35-year mark, I started to ask myself questions. What would the next chapter look like? The year was 2010. I coined the phrase 2010 and beyond, and I set out to explore by talking to people, those who had retired, many from other businesses or industries. I did a lot of reading. I asked a lot of questions. I really wanted to determine what life after retail could look like for me and what would it feel like for me. I had an opportunity to become a fellow at Harvard. The Advanced Leadership Initiative program was a perfect way for me to initiate my chapter change. I was a full-time student for 1 year, immersed in academia and learning. I was one of 40 fellows from around the world, and we were curious people asking the question, how can I change the world? Or how do I leverage my leadership skills to make our world a better place? I believed that healthy and productive aging was a very important component in life, and I knew I wanted to influence others to see the value of embracing this chapter as a way to make the world a better place. Since that time, which is really 2017 and beyond, I've been working with a number of organizations. Encore.org and Encore Boston Network are two organizations who have a lot of my time and attention. I'm on the board of the Girl Scouts and have just led a CEO search, which was a marvelous experience for me. I lead two separate scholarship programs for rising college students who may otherwise be underfunded in their pursuit of higher education. I also work with an investment group who focuses on women entrepreneurs, women startups. But I also like to have some fun. I'm working on my golf game, I'm enjoying my grandchildren, and my husband and I love to travel. So what I've created for myself is what I call a portfolio life. I'm very busy, but I'm liberated, and I'm committed to continuing to maximize my leadership skills to help to make the world a better place. And that's why I'm here with you today. Julie?
Thank you, Pat. It's my pleasure to introduce myself as well. I consider myself a very lucky person. I was adopted, having been given up by my teenage birth mother the day I was born. I grew up in a large, loving, extended family where my grandmother, Balmy, was a formative influence in my life. In addition to teaching me to sew and play cards and bake Christmas cookies, she shared stories about teaching English to the children of recent immigrants from Italy in Cleveland. She often spoke of how those kindergartners went on to become teachers and doctors, giving back to the very community that had given them a chance. Like my mother, who was also a teacher, my grandmother helped me understand the importance of education and of giving people opportunities. They also taught me that what we do with opportunity is up to each of us and the choices we make. I chose to stay in Washington, D.C. after completing a college summer internship at the Library of Congress. I wanted to continue college, and to afford George Washington University, I found work at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and my career in public service was launched. In short order, after graduation, I had the opportunity to join the staff of National Public Radio 2 years before Morning Edition went on the air. In that post-Watergate era, I was excited to help raise money to support independent journalism, a hallmark then and now of public broadcasting. NPR fueled my passion for public service and for fundraising for causes I believed in. When my children were very little, I decided to volunteer with UNICEF because it was active on the ground in Southeast Asia, helping mothers and children survive and rebuild community after my brother and thousands of other American men and women had served their country fighting a war there. Over the next several decades, I pursued a career spanning 6 small nonprofit organizations with operating budgets ranging from $300,000 to $1 million. I learned to grow organizations and to make them sustainable. It was always a challenge, and I loved it. Just over 3 years ago, as I approached the age that many choose to retire, I was chosen, and I chose to accept the leadership of ESC, where my white hair, high energy, and broad knowledge of how nonprofits shape our communities for the better, I here can exemplify where and why people our age are needed. At ESC, it is my privilege to match the talents of people who want to give back with the needs of nonprofits for the expertise to help them succeed. ESC is a trusted resource here in New England, working with over 100 organizations of every type and stripe annually. In fact, Pat and I met through ESC. In many ways, Pat is typical of the people who come through our doors in that portfolio stage of their careers, looking for fulfillment through service, each one looking for opportunities to use their skills, continue learning, and make a positive difference in their communities, each following his or her own unique path.
What we'd like to share with you are the facts. They're pretty staggering. 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 within 10 years. 10,000 people turn 65 in America every day. And there are more people over 50 than under 18 in our country.
Life expectancy has shifted to over 79 years. It was just 49 years at the beginning of the 20th century. Older adults are healthier than ever before, and we know many of the contributing factors. And purpose is associated with 7 extra years of life. And that's what we want to focus on today.
It's no surprise that there's a lot of research that has gone into this demographic phenomenon that we are all a part of. There are several authors, a few of which I'm going to highlight here to give you just a flavor of the kind of research that's going on that has educated me and enriched my knowledge on the topic. Mark Friedman, who is the founder of Encore.org, has recently written a book that I think the title is quite fun, How to Live Forever. He really does focus on the value of staying engaged through storytelling and helping children throughout our life as we have the opportunity to work with them. Encore.org is an organization that is a hub tapping the talent of people over 50 as a force for good. It focuses on our culture, it focuses on our institutions, and it focuses on our leadership. I encourage you to visit the website of Encore.org to learn more about Mark Friedman, and you'll really become a very well-educated and well-versed Encore member of our group. Another book that's worth sharing with you is The Longevity Economy, particularly for those who have, so many of you have had a business career, as we saw in the early survey. Joe Coughlin founded the MIT Age Lab. He's bringing research and technology together to ensure that our world is better prepared for the aging population. He's a big thinker. He recognizes the need to engage all facets of society in this cultural revolution. I think you'll enjoy his book, and I think you'll find it provoking your thoughts. The last book I want to highlight is one that is called This Chair Rocks. Ashtyn Apple is somebody who spends a lot of time working to dispel the word ageism from our society. The concept of moving not only us, but all of those around us from the dread of aging to embracing the possibilities of aging is a worthwhile philosophy. It's enriching. By the way, she's a little bit of a rebel, and she'll make you think a little bit differently. I've had the pleasure to spend time with each of these three authors. Their work is good, the books are fun to read, and they provoke new thoughts and ideas. Lifelong learning offers a lot of possibilities. Included in this deck, and certainly accessible to you, I'm sure Maura can help us with this, is a list of many, many resources. You'll see 2 pages of resources. They are books, they are websites, they are authors, and I think it's important for you to build your own portfolio of knowledge as you become better versed and more intelligent on the topics that we're talking about today.
Nearly a third of older adults in the United States exhibit purpose beyond the self. That is, they identify, prioritize, adopt, and actively pursue goals that are both personally meaningful and contribute to the greater good. Think about that. These commitments are central to the way these older adults identify and seek meaning in life. That's meaning 34 million people are dedicating themselves to making their corner of the world a better place.
So we've talked a little bit about what Julie and I are all about. We've talked a little bit about research and statistics, but really what's important here in this session is what does this mean for you? And that's what this is all about. The next slide that I want to share with you is one that I think is pretty illustrative of the stages of life and what we're speaking about today. Remember that we spoke about that life expectancy has added 20 years to our lives. I like to think about these bonus years that are not at the end of our life, but are positioned post-career and pre-being old. When you think about it from this perspective, it's easier to understand how important it is to give this life chapter some of your attention. Think about how much time you spend planning your education, your career, perhaps your marriage. Don't you think it's also worthwhile to plan this new stage life with the same vigor and same enthusiasm? We feed our souls while providing services, putting our skills and talents to work. And now Maura would like to ask another question. Maura?
Great. We've got another poll question for you. Which stage of life best characterizes you today? Are you in midlife, that new life stage that Pat just talked about, or older adult? I'll give you a few more seconds. It looks like we've got votes coming in fast and furious. So if I wait one more second for results, a few more are coming in. Great, I'll close this poll and share these results with all of you. So it looks like it's about 50-50, but 44% in midlife, 48% in new life stage, and 7% consider themselves older adult.
So for those of you in particular in that middle section of the new life stage, how are you going to live it? Are you going to identify a particular passion that you want to pursue? Is that where you're going to find your purpose? Are there new tools you need? Do you need to learn some specific things? How are you going to get started doing this? For instance, do you want to pick up that guitar that's stashed in the closet since you started your first job after Holy Cross? Or do you want to make a habit of eating healthier? Do you find yourself reacting to the news and wanting to change something in your community or beyond? Do you have marketing skills and want to use them to help a community food bank recruit more volunteers? Or do you have a financial background and want to use it to help an climate action network illustrate the impact of different energy options? Finding your purpose is a first step. Making sure you have the tools comes next, and then connecting around opportunities after that. One way to find purpose is by linking up with a nonprofit. When we've talked about nonprofit organizations, it does help to frame what sets them apart from work in the corporate sector. First, I would say that they're mission-driven. They're founded on the premise that they're needed to fill a gap in society. You can probably name 5 nonprofits where you live that aren't listed on the slide. Second is passion. The people who started a nonprofit and the people who work there volunteer there and support a nonprofit because they care about the work. They believe it matters and that it makes a positive difference. Another way we think about nonprofits is that they are working toward a double bottom line. What does that mean? It means that they're trying to have not only successful financial performance, but positive social impact. At the College of the Holy Cross, for example, the double bottom line measures demonstrate that the funds that college receives are spent in the achievement of their goal to educate the leaders of tomorrow. And now, Maura, will you do our last poll?
Absolutely. So our final question for you today, based on your nonprofit experience, please check all that apply. Has your experience been school or university related? Is it related to your church? Are you involved in a local community organization like the Boy Scouts or a local food bank? Or are you doing national or international experience like Habitat for Humanity? You can select multiples, so it'll be interesting to see how busy everyone has already become. I'll give you a few more seconds to let these votes come in. I see the votes starting to slow down. So with that, I'll close the poll and share these results that 58% are involved with their school or university, 57% are involved in their church, 72% participate with a local community organization, and 30% are involved in a national or international nonprofit.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much. Not surprising with our Holy Cross alums to have such a good showing on those categories. So where do you start? How does one begin this process? You might need a jump start. There are instruments out there, such as 2 that are pictured. The one on the left is called Discover Your Encore, or Transitioning with Resilience is the one on the right. These are just 2 options of many. The Discovery tool is offered by Julie's organization, ESC, and while transitioning is the brainchild of a group in San Francisco who run the Resilient Aging Lab. There are many that you can explore, and they help you to think who you are, where you want to go. The intent here is to guide people from confusion to clarity. If you were to involve yourself with the discovery from ESC, you would see and become familiar with this pyramid, seeking purpose. So, and if you are like me, it's been a long time since you've taken the time to explore me, and what makes me tick. You may be intimidated by this process, yet if you don't reflect, you won't be able to maximize your full potential. I encourage you to take the time to embrace these sorts of questions. And if you engage with the tools such as the ones I talked about in the previous slide, you'll start to ask questions very naturally. You may be in need of more personal guidance or direction. There are a host of life coaches or transition navigators, as we call them at ESC. Many of us have worked with coaches throughout our career, and now you can do similar work, but focus on your personal development versus your career development. I do think it's important to note that you will not find your passion or purpose on your first attempt. Try to think of this chapter as a continuum. It may be fraught with some fits and starts. What you think you will love, you may not be so perfect in fitting with that after all. Or perhaps you're going to link up with an organization whose mission aligns, but perhaps you can't connect with that team. It's important to feel like you belong as you navigate through this chapter of life. I like to say there's a lot of head and heart in this journey that we are taking, and it's important to evaluate your self-purposes, but also make sure they align with the organization that you perhaps will join.
And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about Empower Success Corps, because we really have a mission to match up people who have are at the stage in their career, in their life, where they want to give back. The opportunities with ESC, some are episodic. That's, I would say, our consultants are working in a very episodic nature with nonprofit organizations. They might do a board retreat for a nonprofit, or they might be involved for 6 to 12 months working on a strategic plan. Occasionally, there are full-time opportunities where someone is embedded in an organization, and those people for us are ESC Encore Fellows. Part-time positions are also an opportunity with the fellowships program. But in all of our programs, there's the opportunity for people to have room for the rest of their life, room for vacations, travel, and other pursuits, even golf. The ESC US affiliate network encompasses 14 locations around the country. They are all pictured here for you. The most active affiliates are in Seattle, Los Angeles, Oklahoma City, Pittsburgh, Chicago, New York City and environs, and certainly Boston and environs. But we are all interested in helping nonprofits be successful. The whole idea for ESC started actually as an international executive service corps, and it was launched from the Rose Garden, the White House Rose Garden, in 1964, and it was founded by David Rockefeller, whom some of you may have heard of. It wasn't too many years before ESC started addressing the needs of nonprofits, and that is the genesis of the ESCs around the country. I want to tell you just a little bit about some of the people that volunteer with us so that you get a feel for why they do it and what they do. This is Marjorie. After concluding a career in marketing at Fidelity Investments, Marjorie has applied her 30 years of experience using market research and marketing strategies to help address key issues at nonprofits. For ESC, she has provided this kind of service to the Cambridge Public Library, Maud Morgan Arts, Gore Place, Wright Boston, the Art Connection, Quincy Asian Resources, and many, many more. Marjorie is also one of our lead trainers. That is to say, she helps teach new consultants the art of ESC consulting. Another consultant I want to introduce you to is Cassandra. Cassandra's background as a clinical social worker has kept her busy for many decades. She's also been a teacher at the university level. She uses her skills to assist organizations with evaluation, cultural competency, and organizational culture. She's also done retreat planning and facilitation and succession planning and strategic planning. In addition to her work with clients like Chica Project and Family Continuity, Cassandra, a good listener and coach, facilitates a monthly ESC roundtable for nonprofit chief executives. Irving. Irving is a senior technology consultant. He was an accomplished information leader, technology leader, with over 25 years of experience leading technology and program management operations in emerging and mid-sized companies. For ESC, he has worked with Father Bills and Mainspring at a nonprofit organization that serves the homeless and at the Youth Council. And last, I want to introduce you to Leon. Leon came to us as an experienced financial professional and strategic advisor whose career spanned several of the largest banks and other financial institutions. In his year-long fellowship through ESC, he led and supported the management team around new priorities at the Museum of African American History as they looked to their second half-century of existence. ESC fellowships are an innovative way for nonprofits to hire experienced and talented professionals. Fellows are paid a stipend and they're embedded in high-impact, time-limited roles, typically working either 6 months full-time or half-time for a year. ESC fellows have served in roles such as interim executive director, human resource manager, development manager, data system integration analyst, volunteer manager, and information security specialist.
Julie's just shared lots of examples of ESC work, and I can say firsthand that I joined ESC right upon my retirement as I was in my exploration phase. And although at the moment I'm not doing much consulting work, I enjoyed it, and I also enjoyed two other pieces. One was the training that was offered to me by ESC to prepare me to really move from being in a for-profit business to a not-for-profit, and there's a lot to learn in that transition. So the ESC training was very valuable for me. And it also initially introduced me to a community of really good people. I met new friends and people who thought like I did, but I would never have encountered had I not joined ESC. So the things one gets out of this experience are both giving and getting, and that's important to remember. What I want to talk to you about is a couple of other ideas that just, if nothing else, what we're showing you right now is that there's a myriad of ideas and thoughts out there. There's not one way to go, and you have the ability to make lots of choices and do lots of investigating. The first organization I want to talk about is important to this group because an Ignatian Volunteer Corps is very embedded into the Jesuit culture. Dave Hinchin, who may be on the call today, is the regional director and a Holy Cross alum, and he has been the director for some time. I love the tagline that the IVC has, experience making a difference. I kind of think that says it all. The description is clear here, and the commitment is what I would consider to be a more significant one. It would be 3 to 4 days a week for an academic year. You would be embedded in a nonprofit organization with a real job or a real responsibility. The beauty of this program is that you're part of a community of volunteers and you're able to convene with them, share and learn on this spiritual journey. Seems like a perfect option for a Holy Cross grad. One might say, but I'm in Missouri or I'm in California or I'm in another part of the country. Much like ESC, IVC, and many of these organizations we're speaking about have representations all over the country. And so you are not limited to organizations that are based in Boston, which is where we are based. It is really a national movement with national organizational interests. The next organization I want to share with you is Generations Incorporated. This organization is embedded with AARP, so it has some significant marketing and infrastructure. Once again, it's more structured opportunity. It's 2 to 3 days a week, 2 to 3 hours at a time. I've spent some time in the classroom witnessing the volunteers working directly with the children, supporting teachers' efforts to achieve success with reading skills of the kids. Studies have proven that if by 3rd grade a child isn't able to read, they're never going to catch up, and their life could be predetermined at that very young age. Escaping the cycle of poverty is important, and the Generations Incorporated is very committed to that. Nationally, this past year, I believe they worked with about 8,000 kids, so it's a very vibrant program that works on these literacy skills. The last organization that I want to highlight for you is the Boston Debate League. Once again, I can assure you that the National Association for Urban Debate Leagues has presence in many cities in our country. What I like about this concept is that it is episodic. This program works with over 800 kids in Boston, teaching kids the art of debate. I participated in a competition on a recent Saturday where I was a judge. It was so much fun to engage with these young students, to witness their engagement on a topic, using the debate process as a way to learn and to effectively communicate. Imagine if we could teach kids how to communicate their differences using research, logic, and most of all, respect. Wouldn't our world be a better place? Mm-hmm. This is a great spot for those lawyers out there who like a good debate, or perhaps a liberal art-educated Holy Cross grad. Wonderful way, and one can do it with a group of friends, one can do it a couple of times a year, but you can easily see how you would become connected to this organization.
Pat's own journey took her to Harvard University, and that program is called the Advanced Leadership Initiative. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute is a program that takes place across the country at 120 different universities and colleges in every state of the country. There's also the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute, and at almost every college, or certainly at least one college in your area, I would bet you there are courses for audit, where you don't have to pay the full tuition and you can simply take courses. Rhodes Scholars is another program for those of you who have the time and interest in traveling. They're often very educational, and people I've talked to who have done Rhodes Scholar trips rave about them. Discovery Centers are a new program that we are piloting here in Eastern Massachusetts. We're collaborating with councils on aging, local councils on aging, to help them interest more people at this early older age. Think about how they're going to use these bonus years, these extra 20 or 30 years that we have available to us, those of us who are staying healthy and active. Because there are many ways that people are needed in their local communities. They're needed sometimes on the Parks and Recreation Board, sometimes on the Library Board, sometimes there's a Water and Sewer Commission in your town. There are many, many ways to get involved in local government on these boards. There are many ways to volunteer at some of those government places, like the library, maybe looking for tutors for students or someone to shelve books. There are also many opportunities to hook up with local nonprofit organizations that are looking for volunteers. And at our Discovery Centers in the local councils on aging, we're going to have trained transition navigators who can talk to people about the opportunities that might be available right there in their town or nearby. So there are programs across the country that are being implemented and that are being designed, I would say, with you in mind, and are being implemented even as we speak. If you, using your favorite search engine, Google or Bing or Yahoo or Firefox or whoever, go online and start looking for such opportunities, I think you'll find many, 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 perhaps more than you know what to do with initially.
And just in closing on that educational conversation, it is amazing how much is happening in universities. I know Notre Dame has just opened up a program. I know Northeastern and here in the Boston area is about to launch a program for third chapter learning. And I think for many, that concept is intimidating. You haven't been in a classroom in a long time. But much like the work we're talking about in terms of perhaps volunteering, that can be intimidating as well. As you begin this journey, don't be afraid to look under lots of different rocks and lots of different places. And sometimes a place like Osher, which is a much more informal program but very robust, could be a really good place to put your toe in that water. We like to talk about the ladder of engagement. You start on the first rung, and you determine how quickly or how far up the ladder you want to go. It's just making sure you get on that ladder as a beginning point. The last slide we want to share with you is a very simple little, sort of looks like a flower, I guess. But we want you to encourage that you're going to find a sweet spot. There's a lot of different ways it can look. I hope you see that in the conversation that we've just had. We haven't given you a roadmap that you should follow as much as we've given you ideas that can hopefully provoke thinking and can provoke exploration. what you really want at the center core of your life is purpose. And the purpose can come in many, many different ways. And you'll have to have your own passion. You'll have to believe in the mission. It'll have to work within your expertise, or perhaps not. Perhaps you'll find a new one. But I think the important, if you take anything away from this conversation that we've just had, what I ask you to think about is this bonus stage of life that we've all been given, and how can you manage it, and how can you maximize it, and how can you leave the world a better place as a result of the work that you're going to do. That would end our presentation, and we are now happy to take questions from the audience. Maura, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. We've had a few questions that have already come in, and for those of you listening, I encourage you to find the questions feature on your control panel and start typing in the questions that have come to mind throughout this wonderful presentation. The first question that I'll ask has to do with something that Julie mentioned about the work with ESC. Someone asked if these ESC opportunities are all unpaid or volunteer, and do you have any advice for someone who wants to leave a career but still needs to make some money?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. So the distinction I would make is that the ESC Encore Fellowships are paid opportunities. They come with a stipend that's paid by the host organization, the nonprofit where the person is placed. To be honest, we don't have as many of those opportunities. And in fact, we help people who come to us wanting to do a fellowship and wanting to make that transition from the corporate world, perhaps, to the nonprofit world. We help them find organizations that might be a good match for them, and see if they can't pursue it. Our consulting opportunities are all volunteer. So the way people are paid for consulting is the joy of seeing the organization actually be able to make changes that benefit their clients, that benefit the organizations as it moves forward in the world.
And there are, by the way, other organizations that we did not mention today, such as retirementjobs.com, which is run by a gentleman by the name of Tim Driver, who does some really, really good work helping match what I call encore talent for pay with the needs within society. And there are other organizations such as Reserve, which is a national organization that does for stipended. I have an acquaintance who's working in New York City right now and working for the government, funded and paid for by the government, but she is a reservist helping to use her financial expertise in one of the city offices in New York City. So there are certainly ways to marry social good and income so that it fits your needs from both perspectives.
That's great. Another question that came in on the same topic is wondering if ESC works with startup nonprofits.
We do. So the way so I didn't talk about our revenue base. ESC is actually supported, this ESC, Empower Success Corps, is supported about 70-75% by the fees we charge nonprofits for the services that we provide. And that means that when we take on, say, a strategic planning project for an organization and assign a qualified, trained team to that, we've actually looked at the budget of the organization and considered that and considered the scope of the project and how long it's going to take, and we arrive at an estimate of what we think the project should cost, and then we negotiate that fee with the organization. We try to make every project affordable. If the organization says, if the leader of the organization says we really can't do $5,000, we try to make it a fee that they can afford. Some of the ESCs around the country have more foundation funding than we do and are still able to rely more on foundations to share some of the burden of the project costs. But here in Boston, we are largely driven by the fees that organizations can pay.
That's helpful. And another question came in asking about what would be the next step if you wanted to explore getting involved with ESC.
So my email address and our website are on the board. on the slide in front of you. Feel free to contact me. The ESCs around the country are listed at that esc-us.org site. And so some of them operate under a different name. In Seattle, it's called 501 Commons. In Pittsburgh, it's at a university, at the Robert Morris University. So when you go to the ESC-US website, you can scan the different locations and you'll find the correct contact information at each of the affiliated ESCs. We're all independent 501c3 organizations. It's a very loose network. We don't have any paid national staff, so there's not tons of information on the national website, but it certainly is a resource for getting to each of us.
And it's helpful to know that they do have different names so that if people find themselves on different sites, they aren't worried that they clicked the wrong button.
Right. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. And another question about the training, because Pat mentioned going through some fantastic training. Is there a fee for that?
No.
Okay,
no.
Wonderful.
I mean, the fee is really the time that the people put into it. And we do have an expectation that after people have been through our consultant training, that they do a project with us in exchange for that training. But
Great.
Most people who go through the training, I'd say the average in our core right now is that people have been with us, more than half the people have been with us over 5 years.
That's great.
For people to come and make it a home.
And,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that what's kind of fun about the training, and for those of you who perhaps are intimidated by the idea of going back to school, the ESC embraces a case study method, and it really is a good exercise to get yourself up to speed, as I mentioned before, going between profit, not-for-profit, and exerting your wisdom and experience needs to be tempered appropriately, and this training helps one to do that more effectively.
That's great, Pat. Yes, our training includes both case studies on consulting skills. Each are actual cases of projects that we've undertaken over the years. We also look at nonprofit governance through a case study approach because governance is so different in the nonprofit world. Boards have such a huge role to play in nonprofit organizations. And we also do a course on nonprofit finance, since nonprofit finance, this double bottom line, is something that people coming from the corporate world may not be at all familiar with.
Well, and a few more questions have come in about the training too. Wondering where it typically takes place and how long it lasts. And I know that will probably change based on the locations, as you explained, but at least for Boston, how do you handle that?
Here in Boston, we do training in the greater Boston area. It has often been in the Metro West area. This spring, we're actually doing our series of training programs up in Burlington. And we've chosen to do that because just this past year, we acquired the ESC of Northern New England. And so we're trying to make our training available to the consultants who live in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. It still does require that people do some traveling. So the training is usually from 10 in the morning to 3 or 4 in the afternoon. For the full day sessions, we try not to have to make people get out during the rush hour traffic. We do an orientation on one day, then we do 2 days on consulting skills, 1 day on governance, and a half day on finance. I think in other parts of the country, it varies. I know it varies considerably. The approach in Southern California is much more through a coaching lens. All projects take a coaching approach, and there is a lot of focus on leadership development in having the people that go through the ESC training out there be in a position to provide leadership coaching to any of the leaders in the nonprofit world with whom they interact.
That's great. Another question came in. This is more of a comment or a sharing of resources, asking if either of you are familiar with Daryl Byers, who's a Holy Cross graduate for the class of '83 and a newly appointed CEO of Interrise. It seems to work in a similar fashion to the way ESC does. Are you familiar with that organization?
I am not.
I have heard of Interrise. Didn't we have a fellow at Interrise? We placed a fellow at Interrise. I'm sorry I can't pull up, because we're on my computer, I can't pull up information about it right now. But yes, I think you could look up interrise.org.
Great, fantastic. And, you mentioned earlier in the conversation that it's good to try out a number of different organizations because you might find some that aren't a fit. And I'm curious, from both of your perspectives, what should people do if they don't like where they land? They're not full-time employees, so they don't have to stay, but is there a preferred or appropriate way to say thanks but no thanks after you've risen your hand and said that you'd participate?
Well, I think one of the benefits of this chapter and stage of life, particularly as one is entering into the nonprofit scene, you have every right to do what's right for you. And diplomacy and courtesy are obviously very important, but you shouldn't be someplace. You have to give something time, right? You have to make sure that you, in fact, give it enough of an attempt. But I don't think anybody should feel anything but confident when they make a decision that this isn't right for me. The schedule is not good. The people aren't very engaging. We've had that problem with a couple of groups that we've worked with, that nonprofits, and quite honestly, we have, I mentioned Encore Boston Network that I am a vice chair of. We've put together a manual that we actually teach the nonprofits how to work with people of these ages, older people who are not kids and are doing a college, responsibility one semester volunteer program. And so sometimes those you work with in nonprofits may not be as intuitive in terms of the audience. And so it's important to verbalize it, and it's important to leave if you don't think it's right for you. And I don't think anyone should ever feel a moment of guilt because you're doing right for you.
That's great. It's helpful. It's always helpful to remember that your time is precious, and you don't have to, if you're not being paid, you don't have to participate any longer.
Right.
This actually brought up, since you mentioned that, training and that specific training for those nonprofits, from your perspective, have you seen any age discrimination in the world of volunteering?
Well, I think that the word ageism that we use is certainly a real word in society, and nonprofits are a part of society. So in fact, there very well could be places and spaces where someone who's 60 or 65 goes in to do some volunteer work, and the 20-something-year-olds who are running the nonprofit, whether they be the volunteer coordinators or whatever, may not, frankly, be as open or receptive. We do think that's worth addressing. We do spend time on it, but when you go back and think about, 20% of our population is over 65. We are living this additional 20 years. We are a very big source for nonprofits who are desperate for more talent so their scale can be expanded. So it's a question of educating. We're working on educating. And I think it's a question of being able to have an honest conversation with somebody who's perhaps running a nonprofit, if in fact you find that when you're there. This is all part of the process. Nothing is perfect, but yet one should feel comfortable articulating and expressing concerns if in fact you encounter them.
And today workplaces have four generations working in them, and I think each generation has a strength, if you will, that they bring to bear. And so some of the people who come to us as consultants who've been out of work a few years may not be as one with social media, and some of their technology skills may be a little rusty because technology evolves so quickly. But they really do bring wisdom and life experience and problem-solving skills to the table that a younger person may just not have had the time to acquire. So having those different generations really helps solve problems that an organization is looking to solve, to think bigger sometimes, to think about personnel issues differently, to think about organizational culture issues. So I think there's a role for all the different ages, and I think one of the things our consultants enjoy when they get on site in the nonprofits with whom they consult is actually meeting other people in the organizations, not just the consultants that they work with, but the board members and staff and stakeholders that they meet at the nonprofits where they do their consulting.
That's great. Yes, getting that sense of community. I know Holy Cross, we're all about building a strong community, and it's something that is important to have throughout your life. Another question came in about finding volunteer opportunities where everyone lives, because we're lucky to have people on the call from across the country. You know, you mentioned going to some search engines, but where really should people begin, and what should they be searching for?
Well, United Way in many cities has a job bank, a volunteer bank. In Boston and in a number of other cities, there's something that's called CARES. So in Cincinnati, I think it's Cincinnati CARES. In Boston, it's Boston CARES. I would try that tag, sort of the name of the city and CARES where you live. Certainly, you can look for opportunities. There are volunteer opportunities often posted in the media. Idealist.org, which posts jobs, also posts volunteer opportunities. Interrise, I'm now, one of my staff members has been kind enough to sit in with us, and she looked up Daryl Byers, the CEO of Interrise. So he is available at dbyers@interrise.org. He has a very interesting background, and you can learn more about Interrise at interrise.org.
Great, thank you.
Pat, did you want to add?
There's some very good technology being developed. We are actually working right now with a nonprofit in Cincinnati that is creating a wonderful tool whereby you would be able to input, your zip code and your interests and your availabilities and a whole host. You'd answer 6 or 8 questions, and it would offer for you available positions. So that's new technology that is being developed. There are versions of it that are probably a little, what I would call dustier, already out there, older versions of that technology. But I think literally Googling, volunteering in my city, wherever my city is, and start navigating through that is really the best way to start, because it really looks and smells and tastes very different in all different cities throughout the country.
But certainly, if you're interested in youth mentoring, there's Big Sister, Big Brother, there's Girl Scouts, there's Boy Scouts, there's Campfire. I think most of those organizations have local affiliates everywhere across the country. There are other types of organizations like Habitat for Humanity that has local chapters. You could contribute nationally, but there are projects locally. I think that's true actually of many of the national organizations, so that you could get involved in, say, a local UNICEF group or a local group involved in climate change activity. So again, thinking about what it is that interests you, and then trying to find organizations that are doing work in that interest area.
And my email is up there, phchad@gmail. I would encourage, if you have any questions, to ask me. My association with Encore.org at a national level would give me the chance and the opportunity to perhaps introduce you to an organization or a city that perhaps you don't know where to go, and I might be able to help. So please feel free to reach out, and I will do what I can to help you.
And that's great. Thank you very much. You've both been incredibly generous with your time. Another really good question has come up about advice for navigating the cultural change when moving from a really fast-paced corporate environment to a slower, maybe more bureaucratic nonprofit environment.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I would call it more bureaucratic, but it may be more layered. Again, I get back to that nonprofit governance piece. In the corporate world, I think in general it's pretty clear. You're driven by the profit bottom line, and the board is really driven by the profit bottom line and wanting to make a return to investors and stockholders. Whereas in the nonprofit world, stakeholders of many types have real input in how many nonprofits are run. And by stakeholders, I mean, for example, one of the jobs that I most enjoyed prior to coming to ESC was as president of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. And that's an organization that both protects and programs the Frederick Law Olmsted designed parks in Boston. Olmsted also designed Central Park in New York, and the grounds that his son designed, the grounds of Stanford University. So the Olmsted legacy is actually across the country. But my point about an organization like that is we had incredibly important partnerships. The Conservancy didn't own any of the parkland. We were in a partnership with the city of Boston, the town of Brookline, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and had to have their permission to do any of the programs and restoration projects on their land. So even though we were raising, over the years, millions of dollars to, say, inventory the trees and do tree pruning and care and restoration of a landscape, we could only do that with their permission, signed agreements, vetting of all the contracts, and a lot of oversight. That was particularly complicated work, but I don't think it's untypical, actually, of a nonprofit, that they're answering to many stakeholders.
Right. And I went from for-profit to not-for-profit. So, in fact, I can tell you there's a very significant difference. In for-profit, by the way, if the P&L doesn't look the way it should look, there's probably going to be some significant consolidations to get the numbers where they belong. In the nonprofit zone, that doesn't happen that way. But what I can bring is good questions to ask about ways that we can leverage our needs or our expenses or our manpower. And although it doesn't happen perhaps as quickly as I would like to see it happen based upon my for-profit experience, I think I help to analyze things differently, and it helps me to slow down. It helps me to think differently and recognize that the world doesn't only work one way. We all benefit when we think from a few different lenses and a few different angles.
That's really helpful. It's nice to hear your perspective, since you both come from different angles and yet are both being really successful in this work. So thank you for that. I have another question to ask about how far in advance should someone start planning for this stage of life? Do you find that people begin volunteering while they're still working and use that as a way to dip their toe in and transition? Or is it something that people explore after they've already retired? What kind of advice do you have based on either your own experiences or the experiences of others who you work with?
Well, I think as one of the first polls we did today demonstrated, many of the people on this call are already involved in volunteering with a nonprofit in one way or another, or involved in a nonprofit in one way or another. And I think the way many people get involved first is volunteering through their church or their school or our sports team of their children or the arts, after-school arts program of their child. So I think many people start in that way. They may also quickly move into a leadership role and decide that they're willing to really roll up their sleeves and chair a board for an organization or serve on the board of an organization and eventually serve as the chair or serve as the treasurer. Organizations are often looking for someone, excuse me, with good finance backgrounds to take on a role of treasurer in a nonprofit, on a nonprofit board. So I think while you're working, but maybe your kids have fledged and the college bills are perhaps over, that's a good time to start to look around and test out where your interests are.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd say it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think there's many, many different ways it can happen. If I could do it again, I would say I would have engaged at an earlier stage of my career in asking some of these what I call hard questions, very introspective questions, because I don't think the chapters need to be so cleanly defined one from the other. I think that there can be an evolution of one's life as opposed to a beginning, middle, end. And so I think it's healthy to do as much exploring while you have a few minutes here or there. If most people on the call are like I was always so busy, I didn't think I had time. Yes, I did. I just didn't take the time. And so I waited till I was ending my career to really dive in. But I would encourage people to be more conscious as weave it into their life at an earlier stage.
Well, and Pat, if I may ask this question about your personal transition, to leave the workforce and pursue all of this other work, what has surprised you the most?
How busy I am.
That's great.
How much I have to do and how many things I have going on and how many interesting people I've met as a result of the work. True confessions, my husband hasn't retired yet, and he keeps telling me he can't because I'm too busy, and he's scared about my life, and he doesn't want it. So I'm not sure that really is the truth, but I think probably I'm a little type A, I guess, so that's me. But it's amazing how much there is to do. Everyone says, I don't know what I'm going to do when I retire. Oh, my goodness, there is so much to do. There really is.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And for those of you who don't want to be quite as busy, you certainly don't have to be, but it's nice to know that's an option.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you to everyone who's still listening, since we've gone a few minutes over our allotted time. I really want to thank Pat and Julie so much for sharing your time and your knowledge today. I'm overwhelmed with the number of resources. A few people have asked questions about whether they'll be able to get a copy of the recording or a copy of the slides, and I'm happy to share those with everyone after this webinar. Once the recording is all ready to go, you'll receive an email from me with information on how to access that. I really want to thank all of you for joining us. You'll receive a short email survey about this webinar, and please give us your honest advice. We want to make sure that this program is relevant to you and that you're getting the kind of information, hearing from the kind of people who interest you and that bring value to your lives like today did. Our webinar series will continue later this month with a webinar on leveraging executive search for professional gain. So keep an eye out next week for information on how to register there. And again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Pat and Julie. There's a lot that I'm going to look into after this discussion. And I hope everyone has a really wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Maura. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Maura. Nice to meet you all, even virtually.